Welcome, everyone. Please, let's take a moment and make sure our cell phones are all in silent mode. We would like to begin with the words of Chief Seattle. Every part of this soil is sacred in the estimation of my people. Every hillside, every valley, every plain and grove has been hallowed by some sad or happy event in days long vanished. Let's now acknowledge that the land on which we gather is within the ancestral territory of the Suquamish people of clear salt water, the Suquamish people. Expert fishermen, canoe builders, and basket weavers, the Suquamish live in harmony with the lands and waterways along Washington's Central Salish Sea as they have for thousands of years. Here, the Suquamish live and protect the land and waters of their ancestors for future generations as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. So welcome everyone to the first of two artist presentations and panels for Crossing the Line, the Passport Reimagined. My name is Jenna Dana. I lead education and community engagement here at BIMA, and I'd like to introduce the exhibition curator, Catherine Alice Michaelis. She's the curator of the Cynthia Sears Artist Book Collection and an artist herself who's been exploring what an artist book can be for over 30 years. She also works with scientists, writers, visual artists, and musicians to make edition print work through Mayday Press.
Hold it up because we have this beautiful catalog. Thank you all for coming. Crossing the Line, the Passport Reimagined is an exhibition Cynthia Sears and I started working on well over a year ago when we invited 15 artists to make an artist book inspired by passports and other travel documents. Only 12 artists were able to make it to the final deadline. 3 of them are here. It takes a long time to bring a show like this together, and I am sure some of the artists could have used longer. Cynthia and I, however, could not be more happy with the result. In addition to these 12 commissioned works, we gathered 18 more titles from the collection on these themes to fill out the show. I hope you find the exhibit inspiring. I hope for everyone there is a work that connects you to your personal story on any of the themes of belonging, identity, travel, immigration, and/or the journeys of your ancestors. The exhibition will also be traveling, gathering passport stamps as it goes. After BIMA, it will open at the San Francisco Center for the Book from April to June of 2025, Baylor University Libraries in Waco, Texas from August to November of 2025, Minnesota Center for the Book in Minneapolis, February to May 2026, and finally, the Mayer Museum of Art at Randolph College in Lynchburg, Virginia, from June to October 2026. Thank you. This is the first time an artist books exhibition from the Cynthia Sears collection has traveled. I am very proud the exhibition has been welcomed so warmly at these locations. They all said yes without pause and with great enthusiasm. And I'm very grateful to Cynthia, who loves to dream big dreams and make things happen. So thank you. I want to thank Laura Zander, who designed the catalog and photographed all the titles. It's a beautiful catalog. It's in the museum store. Also, thank you to Valerie Peterman, who filmed all the books from cover to cover so you could view them on the screen up in the Sherry Grover Gallery. I want to thank Myrna Oglin and Christy Heath for the support for the exhibition and the catalog. They make all of this so much easier and do all the hard detail work. I also want to thank Chandra Sekharan, who wrote a heartfelt essay for the catalog, sharing her own personal relationship to the passport, belonging, and identity. She's up here in the front row. Also in the audience is Roberto Benavides over here. He's one of the passport commissioned artists in the show and also the piñatas on the first floor. And I guess that's my introduction. So I'm going to give you this back. So up here on the stage, I'm going to tell you who these three people are, and then one at a time they're going to come up and give you a little presentation, and then we're going to have a Q&A. Shu-Ju Wang is a painter, book artist, gardener, seamstress, and immigrant American who twice crossed borders without a valid passport and once overstayed a visa. I've been there, done that. She lives in Portland, Oregon. She cares deeply about the environment and often collaborates with scientists and other artists. I've known Shu-Ju a few decades, I think. One of her beautiful paintings hangs on my wall at home. We have many of her artist books in the collection, and she has participated in events here in the BIMA Auditorium before. Thank you, Shu-Ju, for being here. Carletta Carrington Wilson in the middle. Her literary and visual works merge as artist books, installations, and collages. They mirror the melding of language and form. Peering into a vast, unwieldy past, Wilson interrogates how the creation of the past and the scripting of its future inform an eye and shape a mind. Carletta has also been on artist book panels here before. Her stunning piece, Letter to a Laundress, stole the show in the 2019 BIMA Group, I get teared up, sorry, in the 2019 BIMA Group exhibition, Open Sesame, The Magic of Artist Books Revealed. A little birdie told me she has a solo show scheduled for BIMA in the near future. Congratulations and welcome back, Carletta. Kitty Koppelman is a self-taught queer elder printmaker living in Olympia. She uses her printmaking practice as a platform for conveying humor and optimism. Humor and optimism are often in short supply around the issues of passports. They were the primary reasons we included her in the exhibition. We needed that. I love her work. Her style carries the mission of the message in powerful but caring words. My favorite quip of Kitty's is, "Cut the crap," along with "Home Sweet Homo." She's playful with words, too. Kitty's work was in BIMA's Spotlight show last year and also in BIMA's Matters of Pride exhibition earlier this year. So welcome our panel. Thank you. And now Shu-Ju is going to come up and share some of your work.
Hi, I'm Shu-Ju Wang, and thank you for that lovely introduction, Catherine. And thank you, Cynthia and BIMA, for the invitation to create the work and for the exhibition opportunity, and of course, to be here today to talk. Artist books are, and I plan to come up for the rest of the series, because artist books, it's so important to hear the artist talk when you're looking at an artist book. So, and thank you, Catherine, for the invitation to participate in the panel. So I'm going to talk about some of my works from the past 20 years, all about crossing borders. So this is Pocket Atlas for Travelers from 2002. So this is my experience as a 15-year-old who left my home country for the first time, and learning how little I knew about the world, and even that little was false. And it was just such an eye-opening experience. It was actually kind of terrifying. So I traveled from Taiwan to Hong Kong to Bangkok, Thailand, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Rome, England, before landing in San Francisco as a 15-year-old. And this book has just a little one-sentence, two-sentence story from each of those places. And I'm going to read. Oh, let me say that it was just terrifying to find out the little that I knew was really not true. And then later I discovered how those lies were told for the sake of like nationhood and nationalism. And every year I learn more and more about that, even now, what's happening in our country. But so I'm going to read a little story that I wrote. Oh, I should advance. So this is first stop, and you can see one of the lies on the slide right now. So I'm going to read you the story from Bangkok. As I sit in the back seat, waiting for the light, a stranger walks up, and I recall the news story, thugs in Bangkok rob cars at intersections. The driver rolls down the window. No, no, I shout. He hands over a roll of bills. We are being robbed. My heart thumps as a stranger reaches inside his bag. He takes out a bottle and a rag and washes our windows. I seriously thought at that moment that he was going to shoot us. I really thought he was pulling out a gun to shoot us. But so that's my Bangkok story. Then Fatherland from 2006. Taiwan was colonized by influxes of ethnic Chinese in waves over the last 700 years, pushing the indigenous people of the island into the mountains. And this book is about the Chinese colonists. And I am Chinese, I'm ethnic Chinese. This book is about the colonists in Taiwan and how their burial rituals developed, all focused on their desire to return to their ancestral lands. So they're buried, and after 7 years, the bones are dug up and placed in urns, and the urns go into a mausoleum waiting to be shipped back to the mainland. After the Civil War, that stopped happening, but the ritual continues. And nowadays, but it's been 80 years since the split, so Taiwan has developed its own identity, and they no longer feel Chinese. So that ritual, so that meaning is really lost. But because real estate is in such a premium, they continue the practice. And there's a whole business segment devoted to the disinterment of bones after 7 years. And but people just think it's because real estate is such a premium. And on the back of the accordion, you see, so if, very close to my parents' place, if you walk up the hill, there was a cemetery there, and there were advertisements for these businesses for dealing with the digging up of the bones and putting them in urns, the whole ritual of burning the money, the paper money, to send the ancestors on their way. And let me make sure I didn't miss anything that I wanted to. Okay. So I'm also a painter, and in 2012, I did a series of paintings called Red Bean Paste and Apple Pie. It's a series of 11 paintings, both diptychs and polyptychs, using food to talk about the immigrants' experience. And this is the first time that I'm really thinking about my experience within the context of the larger immigrant American community, and also thinking about our relationship with the non-human world. So using food as a metaphor to talk about that. And in some of the paintings, let me go back. So here you can see the coastline around the Pacific is kind of indicated in that center circle. You can see Taiwan just on the left of the mandala, all the way following the coastline, and Oregon is on the other end. And the mule deer that comes into my yard to eat the apples. And apples in Taiwan when I was growing up were very precious. They were very expensive. You would buy 2 apples and that would be like a gift that you would give to someone. But here, of course, we let them fall on the ground and the animals come and eat them. There was, let's see, what was I? And the border crossing is, the fact that it's 2 panels and I've bolted them together. And in some ways, I kind of feel like that's what Americans kind of have to do. You're just kind of strong-arming the two parts together. Oops, am I advancing? Yeah. So in this case, you see the coastline much more clearly, and I'm indicating the entire map on the background as well. And the cattle egrets of the rice paddies and the middle arc of the wheat fields. And again, the rice paddy and the wheat fields, but this time it's the rice paddy frogs and the wheat field mice. So, I'm starting to think beyond just my own experience and starting to think about my relationship with others in the non-human world. The laundry maze, this was an installation, and it's a very simple maze, and I'm referencing the Chinese laundry. And my grandfather in Taiwan had a laundry. And I always, as a child, I loved to go into the third floor where they stored all the finished garments. And, because I was little, I would walk through there and get lost. And that was always a fun thing. So I created this based on that experience. But I went to several English as second language classes, and I interviewed the students there to find out what their professions were prior to immigration and post-immigration. Our professional identities in this country is so important. That is your public identity. But quite often, immigrants, they come here and they cannot practice as an architect, as a physician, as an engineer, because you don't have the credentials. So they necessarily have to change their professions. So this is a laundry maze, and you can see it's a very simple maze. You can't really get lost in here. You can walk through. The tags are sewn on the front of shirts. There are 2 tags, one for their profession before immigration and one for their profession after immigration. And actually, the after immigration is on top, and then you flip over to see what they were before they immigrated. And on the back of the shirts are painted what used to be the natural borders of nations, so rivers, oceans, and mountains. And this is people walking through it. And let me make sure after I installed it and walked through it the first time, I was very surprised that I was very disoriented just being in there, because you can see so little. You have the shirts on your side, you can't see very far out. I actually experienced vertigo the first time I walked through it. And because the shirts also moved as you're walking through. And I thought that was a delightful discovery, not that I wanted anybody to get dizzy in there, but just how the immigration experience can be so disorienting. So that was, I guess, a quote-unquote happy coincidence. And nobody fell down when they were in there. So the passport, this is my entry in the exhibit. So as I continue to learn more and more about our interactions with the non-human world, I started to revamp my garden to make it a better habitat. So I started to pull up, and one of the many projects that I'm doing in the garden is to pull up the landscape fabric weed barrier in the garden, and I decided to use that material for the book. And especially after I pulled them up and I discovered that a lot of roots had actually penetrated the barrier. So the fabric really doesn't do anything. The roots will go through. So I used the fabric and also some parts. So on the cover there, you can see there's the patch in the middle has the roots that went through the fabric. And I also wanted to use the needle and thread to mimic the action of the roots passing through the barrier. So that's why I decided to use embroidery, even though I am not at all an expert embroiderer. I am a seamstress. I decided it was an opportunity to learn how to embroider. So as I researched the idea of the passport, I discovered that in the West, the freedom to travel has really shifted back and forth. And the passport is really less about the freedom to travel than about the restriction of travel. Even from the Magna Carta to the current US passport requirements. The current passport requirement in the US is actually based on the power of a national emergency that was declared during World War II, and that just has never been lifted. Prior to that, a passport was not needed for travel, except for during World War I. So this is a fairly new, in the history of people, a fairly new requirement. So the book gives you a little bit of the background about the proclamation of the emergency, and then I talk about the routes crossing the barrier without a valid passport. Then there's a story of a Guatemalan father and his 7-year-old child who made the trek into the U.S. without a passport. My story, 2 of my stories of going to Great Britain without a valid passport. Well, I had a passport, but they did not recognize it as valid. Then there's the story of the Threads crossing, and Dalai Lama. Oh, I didn't picture that. The Dalai Lama's flight from Tibet to India, and our efforts to move coastal redwoods north from their current California homeland in a climate-changed world. So these are stories about border crossings without valid passports. Okay, and I am ready for Carletta.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. I am always surprised to find myself at BEMA. I do have to say that. And I never take it for granted. And actually, I'll tell you, when I got this commission, I was a little anxious because I say I'm a sort of flounderer. I will refer to that. So having a deadline really was really hard. And actually, I did extend the deadline.
You were the first one done.
I know, but it wasn't done. Remember, you're right, it wasn't done. She had the first part, and then I said, well, there's one more part, and then there's one more. So actually, you're not gonna experience the full experience because, but that's okay. You'll know enough. So, wait. A column shifts, distraction of addition and or subtraction, weigh against a mean proportion of gift, barter, tribute, capture. What did they bid at the bite of Bonnie, lying at the foot of that ocean? As I said, I spent a lot of time floundering, trying to figure out how I might fit a history of unwilling travelers into the size, shape, and materiality that one can hold and bend in a hand, studying its arrivals and departures. Endless ends, puddle, spill, topple over, slide down a bank, bodies of water cup and sup of eye, holding a future promise. At dawn's daunting hill, low valley, gorge, an island's impossible reach, across what land of caravan, into which country of cowries, you're the kind they go at a gal to get. Nothing was stamped except the vivid memory of their capture. The darkness of their skin ushered them into those ships, but not before searing hot metal burned into each body some cryptic code. The scars would heal into raised marks, unlike their country marks. These marks, delivered by the hands of strangers, filled them with dread. Lagoons, eddies, finfish frog, fishtails splash, or flash. Actually, that's not right. Hold on. Lagoons, eddies, finfish frog, fishtail flash, or splash. Bones make home out of a river's possession. What would you know of Bordeaux? What they had in common with a world of 17th, 18th, or 19th century travelers were the ships. All manner of ships crossing oceans, lakes, rivers, and seas. At first, I hunted for small wooden models of ships, thinking I might be able to saw them in half and have the both sides for the covers. Then I looked for wooden frames to create an accordion structure with paper or cloth pages. Then my eyes fell on these 5x5 blocks of wood with the niche carved into the side. I paired them by 2 and saved an extra block as a tester, thinking I would make an addition of 4. Not. I found some hinges at Earthwise, then focused on the niche. What could go in there? Cloth. And this decorative gold paper. Of course, they had to be painted. A blue, a very deep blue, and then pale blue, sea and sky. Each pairing became a page. What's the story? Calabar. I could use a text from How Far Calabar. At this point, the work begins to work me. The table is full of beads, small chains, cloth, and cowries to put to test in that niche. I focus my imagination on the idea of bodies in transport. As I went meandering through the gift shop of the Fry Museum, my eyes landed on these wooden hands. There weren't very many. I bought them all. With anxious anticipation, I returned home. Would they fit into that niche? It is a 4-page book, pages numbered by cowries. The currency that bought bodies and or sold bodies. Gold and cloth serve the same purpose. These are the illustrations. What is the source of that text? Catherine Alice asks, having sent the images of the work in progress. A poem, How Far Calabar, published by Calyx in 2017, I replied. I thought my stamping of excerpts of the poem would suffice, but quickly realized that if Catherine is asking the question, others would too. The text crosses, oh, hold on, now I can advance it. The text crosses the blocks and waves, just enough text to transport its meaning. Knowing naught of whence, where, then there, when the coming going be gone, not route, track, path, back to that place chalked up by dust, burn away by sunbound day, wind-washed, ground down bit by bit into grit grime of time and somewhere air in a port of call by a cool pool near an estuary, along every egress and entrance, memory moulders against shoulders in Peru's blues. Bonnie Thompson Norman and I chew on this. We decide upon a broadside. I find this gorgeous paper which swirls like the sea. However, when I am at Sam and Volunteer Park, taking in the immense wonder of Anita's Buddha bug, the spectacular spectacle of it all. It is on my second trip that I see the newspapers. How brilliant. There, you can read all about it. Instead of a broadside that someone would have to stand and read, and it's a long poem, I would create a gazette. Not only would I print it, it would print the whole poem, but most importantly, using the Library of Congress's historic newspapers, I would search out articles about slave ships and slavers and ports from the 19th century with news of the day. Thus, the armchair traveler. For the armchair traveler, the Courtship Gazette becomes a passport to a past port. So, here is the cloth with, the ports are basically stamped onto there. And here, these are the illustrations. As I mentioned, it's a 4-page book, so the cowries are the pagination. And when you see, it is a small book, but when you see, you'll see the gold behind the cowries. For those of you who know about the trade, then people's bodies were purchased for these cowries. The cowries were a form of currency. And there would be a huge number of, it's not one or two, it's like bags of cowries. But also cloth. Cloth was cloth currency. And the cloth was not only African cloth, but also European cloth and East Indian cloth. And there are those hands, which those are the miracle, having found those. And then here is the text. And I wanted, so you know the passport. The thing is, I wanted to evoke the idea of the ship, because that is the one thing that is in common in terms of the passport idea. And then this is a detail of the hand. There is a chain right around that hand. So I imagine this as a female body. In the trade, most of the information is really generally given about the men, but there's a whole different history for the women in the trade. And then I went to Earthwise. See, aren't those great hinges? They look authentic, don't they? Yeah, I think that's it. Oh, there we go. So, as you said, the end. So I sent the images of the book proper. And then, of course, when I saw that newspaper at SAM, and I was like, wow, I would make this Gazette. And so it took a while for it to come into being, but this is the complete poem. And then there are the articles of the day. Don't have to use your imagination. Thank you. Oh, all right, right. So, given that the after and the next and the next, there are copies of the Gazette in the gallery, Sherry Grover Gallery upstairs. So I really wanted people to be able to take it with them, because to stand and read and absorb, I just felt it was too long of a poem for that. So I'm very happy about that. And then hopefully at some point, I did make a recording, and at some point, they'll be able to include this in the show.
So go get your Gazette at the end.
Hi, that's a selfie. I'm not a public speaker, so I'm just going to read what I wrote. I'm just an introvert, weirdo artist. So here's the show. My work is in lino cut and letterpress printmaking. And I mostly do reduction prints. And I'm going to show you how that works. Reduction prints are made by printing a series of colors multiple times from a single block. Each color is added by going through a sequence of carving, inking, printing, and drying. I'll show you that again. That's the first two colors. And there's another two. And then final. As the process evolves and the layers of color build up, the block is reduced, leaving only the last color. This means it's impossible to go back and make more prints. I learned how to do this from a library book. Here's one more example. Ta-da. So I'm originally from New York, and when I was a little kid, I was routinely dressed in frilly dresses, tights, and patent leather shoes. I was in the closet from when I was born until I was about 13 years old, which was in the early 70s. I was incredibly lucky to have been born to parents who didn't freak out or kick me out. And this was them in 1991 at the New York City Pride Parade. And they pretty much went like every year for maybe 10 years with PFLAG. So as a queer identified artist, I use letterpress to make prints that combine words and images in ways that uplift and affirm queer life. And I love to make people laugh and think. Oh, you're laughing, that's good. Another selfie. This is my $3 bill. Queer money. Latrice Royale. Happy times. When I first heard about this passport project, I knew that I wanted to do something relating to gender. Before I even started making it, I spent about 6 months reading, listening, learning, and reflecting on the topic. And as my research progressed, I found a new understanding of my own experience of gender. I also found myself just getting more and more pissed off at the absurdity of this construct and the ways that it's impacted so many lives. So I wanted to try to answer that. And this is the intro to my passport. All the world employs a sorting machine through which we view, interpret, categorize, identify one another into either of two categories. This is the gender binary. This mechanism poses a grave threat to freedom of expression and self-determination. This passport deconstructs that machine and guarantees safe passage throughout, across, and beyond the gender binary. The bearer will be permitted without delay or hindrance, and in case of need, will be guaranteed all necessary aid and protection. And that's the language from the US passport. Guaranteed all necessary aid and protection. So the first thing I thought about was how the gender binary acts a lot like geographic borders do. You're either one or the other. You're one of us or one of them. And I started to think about all the ways that we've been conditioned to constantly patrol that border that divides the gender binary. I imagined that there were two sides, and each one had a flag planted in it, laying claim to all the expectations and characteristics that seem fundamental to their definitions. There are two distinct territories, and there's a boundary that we're constantly reminded not to cross. And I get more pissed off just reading this. It's like, you know, we do this unconsciously too, and it's everywhere. Clothes, hair, locker rooms, dressing rooms, bathrooms. If you choose the correct side, where you're recognizable and expectations are met, there's a place for you. But if neither option fits, Or if anyone even suggests that you're doing it wrong, you're going to need to show your passport so you can go about your business and live your life. When I was born and the world declared that I was a girl, I got firmly steered into one direction and away from the other. As a newborn infant, I was assigned a set of rules and expectations that were meant to give me my place in the world. Being born in this body meant that I was supposed to contort myself to be something that I am most certainly not. The passport provides immunity from this list of horribles. And this is only a partial list. Cut the crap. Bathrooms are perilous places. For most of my adult life, I've worn my hair like this and dressed like this. And when I go into a women's bathroom, I get a jolt of cortisol, the stress hormone, because there's always the chance that someone behind that door is going to plant their pink flag into the tile floor and challenge my right to pee there. I've been stopped too many times to count, and it's actually tapering off since my hair turned gray. I guess they're afraid of me. I don't know. So not as though this is a contest, but as a white, gay, early senior citizen, I actually have it relatively easy. I believe that trans women, and particularly trans women of color, face the steepest hurdles and greatest threats to safety and acceptance. There are feminists from my generation who refuse to acknowledge that trans women are, in fact, women, and that they don't deserve the same considerations and support as cisgendered women. This is a transphobic and bigoted viewpoint, and it drives a wedge between people who are all facing sexism and discrimination and hate. It seems to me that anybody who has to endure the hazards of hateful acts, laws, and perspectives should get flowers and love. Queer is normal. This is a play on words that somehow makes me feel better to put out there in print. I have it on a couple of things that I made. And finally, I have a process shot just to show how on each sheet of paper in the passport, there are actually 4 prints because they're printed front and back and folded. And it was definitely a puzzle. So each print is, folded down the middle. There's 4 prints right there, front and back. I had a transformative experience making this passport, and I was really honored to be invited. And I'm just imagining a world where no one needs to come out of the closet and nobody needs a passport. Thanks. There we are.
Thank you, everyone. That was incredible. So impressive and thoughtful and moving, all of you. I'm going to ask some questions. We're going to take questions from the audience. And also, I want to let you know that Monday, is it November 4th? Roberto will be talking about his art and his passport. We have another panel in January. And Mita Mahato, who also is a commissioned passport artist, will be doing an event in February. So there's inside the exhibitions at the front desk, and it has all the information inside there as well as all the other happenings at the museum. So I hope you'll all come along for the rest of the events. So I want to ask you all, your passports are all very, very different. You all touch on very different things, but you all did a lot of research. And I'm really curious, what did you learn from your research that maybe surprised you? And also, how did you integrate that into your design? Or were you not able? Like, I'm sure there was more than maybe you could fit. And I'm just really curious about that process of deciding, oh, wow, this is amazing. Can I put it in there? Is it part of it? Or I have to let this go? You can answer in any order you wish. Okay, Shu-Ju.
Okay, so am I on? I'm on.
She wanted to hear
Okay.
her name.
Yeah. Yes, say it again, please. Yeah. So the surprising thing for me was finding out that passports were actually not necessary, and that the current U.S. passport requirement came from this wartime emergency. But as I looked back, and there were there were a lot of legal papers. I not that I understood them all, but there were several legal papers on that, and it went all the way back to Magna Carta, the original 1215 version, guaranteed freedom of travel without restrictions. But then the very next year, that clause was deleted. So it did not last very long. But then in the US, nobody needed a passport until World War I. And then there was some restrictions then, and then that requirement was lifted. And then World War II brought it back, and that stayed since. So that was my big surprise. Otherwise, again, I started out with the idea that I wanted to incorporate the story about the plants. And also, all along, because of the climate crisis, I've already been reading a lot about all the migrations. So I knew I wanted to include some of those stories as well. So the surprise was the passport requirement.
Well, actually, the real recognition, I don't want to say surprise, was that the people that I'm concerned with were not going to have a passport. And so I'm holding that, I had my passport, and I'm looking at it thinking, what could I do with this? And then I was like, well, wait, they were not going to have a passport. So how was I going to integrate this idea? I mean, it was really kind of like, well, how are you going to do this? So I was trying to think of all kinds of things until, of course, I hit on the thing, well, they all got on a ship. There were the ships. Now, they traveled differently than the Europeans or other people because they were in the hull of the ship, and it wasn't travel by choice. So that was, but then actually I had been gestating, thinking about, so when were people of African descent able to travel with a passport? Actually, there were, if you were free, but actually was only a couple of people. It wasn't a lot. It wasn't, people were not just taking these journeys, and they fought against that. So literally the idea of travel has always been an issue for African Americans. That is what comes out of this recognition. I, who've traveled, didn't think twice about it, of course, now in the 20th century when I first traveled, but I was thinking then, just the idea of getting on a ship and going somewhere and coming back and telling people about your trip was not possible for these people. And so that then got me, really, which is the foundation of my work, this whole experience of being enslaved and captured. And there was a stamping, but it was a stamping on your body. And not only that, just the fact of who you were meant that it was possible to capture you, whether you were free or not.
Thank you.
My turn?
Sure. Kitty, your turn.
I've been called on. I think the thing that surprised me the most was that I have a new perspective on the gender binary, that it fits into the same category of bullshit as white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy. It's like we made this shit up, but it also makes us who we are. It just was very self-reflective that way, and thinking about my own experience of how I learned to navigate around that. Like, I didn't even know I was doing it until I read Ivan Coyote and Leslie Feinberg. I mean, it was just brilliant people that, have forged an understanding that didn't exist when I was growing up. And so that was kind of a shock. And I feel like it changed me. Like, I'm different now from doing this project that way. And in a great way, because I feel like, it's like uncovering the truth of something that we just take for granted.
Do you feel lighter for knowing?
I feel better.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your passport. To speak to Carletta's theme, there is a piece in the show commissioned by Amos Kennedy Jr., and his is called A Slave Passport, and what it is a piece of paper. It looks like a beautiful piece of handmade paper, and he's reprinted a note that was written for a particular slave to pass through a particular area of our country, to not be stopped or picked up. And I have to say, when this arrived in the mail, it was so emotional to pull this out and read this. And it's a little simple piece of paper, but it's so fragile. It just looks so fragile to me, and so plain. And in its plainness is its power. The power that that piece of paper held, it's really incredible. And it speaks to what Carletta's talking about, of the difficulty of travel and the permission that you needed. And the safety was never guaranteed at all. And I would say still isn't for a lot of people, especially people of color. Are there any questions out there before I ask anything else? Jenna has a microphone, or she'll get a microphone. And if you wait just a second, she'll get a microphone. And we'd love to hear any questions that you have for our panelists. Would you like my microphone, Jenna?
Who's got a question?
Thank you. This is more of a question and a comment, I guess. Your work brought up a question for me about whether or not anybody was going to do a passport for women getting an abortion. Because there's somebody running for office who thinks that we should be documented. And I thought, well, that's the same thing. So I just wondered if anybody had.
We did not get a passport on that theme, and we do have passports, artist books pulled from the collection on other themes. That is not one. We don't have a lot of artist books on the theme of abortion. We do have a video episode of Artist Books Unshelved that I believe is going to be aired soon that is on that theme. It's not one that a lot of artists have directly spoken to. There was one in the last exhibition from Women's Studio Workshop, not a passport, but an artist book. So they are out there, but not in this exhibition.
Carletta, it sounds like you're a poet. That was so beautiful. And Paul handed off a card that you have you're participating in a reading in November. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. Actually, Paul should talk about it. But it's the Cascadia Poetry Festival. It'll be the first poetry festival I'm participating in. It's November 1st through 3rd. Paul, do you want to say?
The Richard Hugo House is where most of the events are. There will be a reading at the Newcomb Vivarium with Robert Michael Pyle and other poets, and details CascadiaPoetryFestival.org. And that was a poem, Carletta. It was just stunning the way the tenor of the room changed when you began your talk today. And it's that kind of presence and that kind of merging of the melody of the language and the content of the language and the imagery that together possesses a quality that no prose can ever replicate. Thank you.
I thank Paul. Paul's been a long supporter of my work. And actually, there's the second book, Cascadia Zen, correct, that is coming out. So it will be a book launch for that also. And I have a poem in that. Thank you, Paul.
Hi. I would love to hear from each of you how you picked artist books as your way to express your art.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. I started out in photography, and then I decided to take a book arts class just as a way of putting a collection of photographs together. But then once I took the book arts class, I discovered how much more, the possibilities were much bigger than I realized. So then I just kind of, I started making artist books, and it just continues to grow as I work, as I make more books. So.
My identity actually for decades has been as a poet in Seattle. And then I bought a house and I had to put something on the walls. And I was saying, like, I'm not buying anything, but I'm gonna make something. So I made these little collages, And then my hands got hot, I would say. And I was just making. And a friend came in one day, said, "Oh, you're almost ready for a show." I said, "Get out of here. I'm just put something on these walls." But that was this transition point, because I was also a librarian around books every day, all day. And someone told me once, "You read too much." I said, "Do you know who you're talking to?" Well, actually, I don't know how it happened, but I had this idea for a show. That show was Book of the Bound. And that's really my entree into artist books. It is a full concept. I dinked around before. I took printmaking classes, this and that, but I wasn't thinking of making. And if you notice, my books are really not where's Bonnie like the real books. With the codex, I'm like off on this side. But actually, with Book of the Bound, this idea of the role of the book in our society, and particularly from the 16th to the 19th century where my work is set, the book was a primary mode of communication and information. And if we understand today, if you don't have your iPhone or your phone with you at all, you are lost in our society. And that was the role of the book. And so here come people introduced in a society, and they learn how important reading and writing and the book is. That's where I sit. That's where then the book becomes a mode of exploring, and what I say, answering history.
Carletta has a body of work that when I saw it and I was talking to her about it, because they were books, but there were no words, she said, "What is a book to people who are not allowed to read?" And I've never forgotten it. It was so profound and moving.
It was against the law.
Yeah.
So it was illegal for them to know how to read or to write. And this is in a society where this is how this society operates. So you can understand it as somebody coming in, from another country, speaking another language, and they don't understand English at all. I mean, that is just devastating. But for it to be against the law for you to do that, or for anybody to teach you how to do that, that's how then, my identity is the poet, as the librarian, and the mostly like collages, kind of trying to put these disparate elements together to make a statement. So the books, I have been doing just a little sort of traditional bookmaking, but not much, because I don't think that's where I need to be.
Carletta. You're brilliant. You are. Amazing. Really. Thank you. My Passport was the second book I ever made. And the first one I made at Penland School of Crafts. And that's where I learned that book arts was even a thing. I didn't know that it was, I didn't know what an artist book was, but I saw some incredible things come out of that place. And I was in a letterpress workshop there because I do letterpress and lino cuts, and the project for the class was to make a book. And so I learned how it works there. And be curious to see the third one. But I think there will be one.
All invited to the party. Museum closes at 5. Are they just people huddled? Well, if you're not invited, you have to leave. So we want to see your passport.